What would you do if one ordinary moment turned your entire life upside down? For Tom, it all started while preparing for his birthday party, a simple search for an envelope to wrap his wife's gift. Instead, he stumbled upon a mysterious card, a love note written by someone he didn't recognize. The words, "I love you, kiss," weren't meant for him, and as he unraveled the truth, he discovered the cracks in his picture-perfect marriage ran deeper than he ever imagined. This is a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and the fight to reclaim a life shattered by secrets. It was a Friday afternoon, and the house buzzed with excitement as I got ready for my birthday party. Claire, my wife of 12 years, had been running around all morning, setting up decorations, ordering food, and coordinating with friends who'd be arriving later. The kids, Sophie, 9, and Ethan, 6, were busy in the living room, making homemade cards for me. As I moved between helping and pretending not to notice the cake being whisked into the fridge, I realized I still hadn't wrapped Claire's gift. A leather journal she'd been eyeing at the boutique downtown sat in my office drawer, untouched. I grabbed the box and searched the house for wrapping supplies. "Where do we keep the envelopes, hon?" I called out, rummaging through the desk in the den. "Check the cabinet in the guest room," she replied from the kitchen, her voice light and distracted. I headed upstairs, pulling open drawer after drawer in the guest room. As I rifled through the neat stacks of paper and unused stationery, my fingers brushed across a sealed envelope. The words on it stopped me cold, "I love you, kiss," written in bold, swirling script. Claire's handwriting. I stared at it, my pulse quickening. Something about those words didn't sit right. I'd never given Claire an envelope like that, let alone one with a note so intimate. I turned it over. It was unsealed, but the edges were sharp, like it had been opened and closed carefully to avoid suspicion. A mixture of curiosity and dread pulled me deeper into the moment. My hands moved on their own as I slid my thumb under the flap and lifted it open. Inside was a card, a plain, elegant design with gold trim. The message inside was brief but gut-punching, "Can't wait to see you again. Love, Jay." The room spun. My knees felt weak as I lowered myself onto the bed, gripping the card like it might combust in my hands. Jay. Who was Jay? My thoughts raced through 1,000 possibilities, each more painful than the last. Footsteps on the stairs snapped me out of my haze. Claire appeared in the doorway, holding a roll of wrapping paper. Her cheerful expression faltered as she saw the envelope in my hands. "What's that?" she asked, her voice tight. I held it up silently, my face a mask of disbelief. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face for just a second before she forced a nervous smile. "Oh, that," she said, her voice wavering. "That's nothing important." I didn't respond, the weight of silence pressing down on both of us. For the first time in years, I couldn't read my wife's face. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure I knew her at all. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating. Claire stood frozen in the doorway, her hands gripping the roll of wrapping paper like it was a lifeline. I stared at her, the envelope and card trembling in my hand. "What do you mean, nothing important?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, slicing through the fragile air. She blinked, her smile faltering. It's from an old friend. Something silly. I must have forgotten it in there." "An old friend?" I echoed, raising the card like a piece of evidence in court. "Claire, this doesn't look like something from a casual friend. Can't wait to see you again. Love, Jay. Explain this." Her face turned pale, the cheerful energy she'd carried all morning draining from her. Well, it's nothing like what you're thinking," she stammered, stepping into the room. "It's a joke. A joke between friends. You're reading way too much into it." I stood, anger and confusion twisting in my gut. "A joke? This doesn't sound like a joke, Claire. Who is Jay? And why are they leaving you love notes?" For a moment, she looked like she might cry, but instead, she crossed her arms defensively. "I can't believe you're making this into a big deal right now. I've been working all day to make your birthday special, and now you're interrogating me over nothing. Her voice cracked on the last word, but I wasn't backing down. Nothing? Claire, this is our marriage we're talking about. You don't get to dismiss it like this. I saw her eyes dart toward the doorway, and I realized she was desperate to escape the room. The vulnerability, the panic, she wasn't expecting this confrontation. It wasn't planned. And that scared me more than anything. Are you cheating on me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her head snapped toward me, her eyes wide. What? No. How could you even think that? I stepped closer, holding up the card. Because of this. Because you're lying, Claire. You're not telling me the truth. Her face crumpled, and for a second, I thought she might admit everything. Instead, she shook her head and exhaled shakily. I'm not having an affair, she said firmly, but her voice lacked the conviction I needed to hear. You're overreacting. Overreacting. The word hit like a slap. Was I? Before I could respond, Ethan's voice floated up the stairs. Mom. Dad. Someone's at the door. She seized the opportunity like a lifeline. We'll talk later, she said hurriedly, brushing past me. Let's not ruin today, okay? I stood there, the card still in my hand, listening to her footsteps recede down the stairs. My stomach churned with doubt and anger, but one thought rose above the rest. She's hiding something. Downstairs, I heard her greeting whoever had arrived, her voice unnervingly cheerful. I followed slowly, slipping the card back into the envelope and tucking it into my pocket. The party was starting, but my focus was elsewhere now. When I reached the living room, I saw her laughing with our neighbor, Angie, who'd arrived early with a tray of appetizers. Claire's performance was flawless, her smile warm, her laugh genuine. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect hostess. But I couldn't unsee the cracks. The forced tone, the way her eyes flicked to me every few moments, as if gauging my reaction. She was hiding something, of that, I was sure. And I was going to find out what. The party had started, but it felt like I was watching it from behind glass. Friends and neighbors mingled in the living room, their laughter and chatter a distant hum. Balloons bobbed on their strings, the smell of food filled the air, and Claire glided through the crowd like a hostess in her element. I tried to mirror her ease, but the card burned in my pocket, a secret no one else could see. Every time Claire passed by, offering a drink or a slice of cake, my chest tightened. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and the faintest tremor shook her hands as she poured wine for Angie. To everyone else, she was the same charming woman they'd known for years. To me, she was a stranger wearing my wife's face. Hey, birthday boy, Angie called, breaking me from my daze. Why do you look so serious? Lighten up. You're another year wiser. I forced a smile, lifting the beer I didn't remember grabbing. Just soaking it all in. Thanks for coming. She grinned and patted my shoulder. You've got a great setup here. Claire's outdone herself. Yeah, I said, glancing at my wife across the room. She always does. Angie followed my gaze and leaned closer, her voice dropping. You okay? You seem off. I shook my head. Just tired. It's been a long day. She didn't look convinced but let it drop, turning to chat with someone else. I slipped into the kitchen, needing a moment to breathe. Away from the noise, I pulled out the card and read it again, as if the words might reveal more on a second pass. Can't wait to see you again. Love, Jay. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the curve of the letters smooth and deliberate. Masculine. My stomach turned at the thought. I was so absorbed in the note that I didn't notice Claire until her voice cut through my thoughts. What are you doing in here? I jumped slightly, shoving the card back into my pocket. Nothing. Just needed a minute. She frowned, stepping closer. Is this how you want to spend your birthday? Sulking in the kitchen. Sulking. I said, my voice sharper than I intended. That's rich. Her eyes narrowed, the tension between us palpable. Do we really need to do this right now? In the middle of the party? Do what? I countered, lowering my voice but refusing to back down. Talk about the note I found. The one you keep brushing off like it's nothing. Her expression hardened, a mask sliding into place. We agreed we'd talk later. No, Claire, I said, stepping closer. You decided that. I don't think you get to make that call after what I found. For a moment, I thought she might snap back, but then her shoulders sagged, and she exhaled. Please, she said quietly. Not now. Just, let's get through today. I promise, we'll talk tonight. The vulnerability in her voice stopped me. As much as I wanted answers, I couldn't ruin the day for the kids, or the guests. I nodded reluctantly. Fine. Tonight. Her relief was obvious, but it only made me more suspicious. She touched my arm briefly, like a peace offering, before slipping back into the party. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I laughed at jokes I didn't hear, thanked people for gifts I barely glanced at, and smiled through the mounting pressure in my chest. Claire was everywhere and nowhere, always just out of reach. By the time the last guest left, the house was quiet again. The kids were asleep upstairs, and Claire busied herself with tidying up. I waited, leaning against the kitchen counter, the card burning a hole in my pocket. When she finally turned to face me, the cheerful mask was gone. Her expression was guarded, her eyes avoiding mine. Okay, she said softly. Let's talk. We stood there in the kitchen, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on us like a storm about to break. Claire crossed her arms, leaning against the counter, her posture defensive but her eyes darting everywhere but at me. Well? I asked, my voice cutting through the silence. Let's hear it. What's the story behind this? I pulled the card from my pocket and held it up like evidence in a trial. Her eyes flicked to the card, and her face paled. For a split second, she looked like she might deny everything, but then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. It's not what you think, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. That's not an answer, Claire, I said, my patience fraying. Who is Jay? Why are they writing you love notes? She hesitated, her lips parting as if to speak, but then she closed them again. The pause was unbearable. Just tell me the truth, I pressed, stepping closer. Whatever it is, I deserve to know. She swallowed hard, and when she finally met my eyes, hers were glistening with unshed tears. It's someone I met a while ago. But it's not what you think, she repeated quickly, holding up her hands. It's complicated. My breath hitched. I felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling, and I was powerless to stop it. Complicated? I echoed bitterly. What's complicated about someone else calling you babe and saying they love you? She flinched, her hands tightening into fists. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice cracking. It was just. I don't know. It started out innocent. We were just talking. Talking. The word hit like a punch to the gut. Talking? I asked, my voice rising. This doesn't look like just talking, Claire. How long has this been going on? She shook her head, tears spilling over now. A few months. But it wasn't serious, I swear. I never. Don't you dare say it wasn't serious, I interrupted, my anger boiling over. Do you have any idea what this feels like? To find something like this and realize your wife, my wife, has been lying to me for months. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice trembling. I never wanted to hurt you. Hurt me? I laughed bitterly, running a hand through my hair. Claire, you've been sneaking around behind my back. Do you even understand what you've done to us? To our family? She broke then, sinking into a chair at the table and burying her face in her hands. Her sobs filled the room, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I was too angry, too betrayed. Did you meet him in person? I asked, my voice like ice. She hesitated, and that hesitation was all the answer I needed. When? I demanded, my heart pounding. On my last trip to the city, she admitted, her voice muffled by her hands. It was a mistake. I didn't know how to stop. I turned away, gripping the counter to steady myself. My mind raced, replaying every moment of the past few months, every night she'd come home late or gone on a trip for work. How had I missed the signs? Had she been laughing at me the whole time? I trusted you, I said finally, my voice breaking. I believed in us. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I still love you, she said desperately. I made a mistake, but it doesn't change how much I love you. Please, we can fix this. I stared at her, my chest heaving. Her words felt hollow, like an echo in an empty room. Could we fix this? Could I ever look at her the same way again? I need time, I said, my voice flat. I need to think. She reached for me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. Don't. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, the sound of her sobs following me up the stairs. I closed the bedroom door behind me, leaning against it as if I could shut out the weight of what just happened downstairs. My heart pounded in my chest, and my mind raced with questions I couldn't begin to answer. For months, she'd been meeting someone else. Talking to him. Laughing with him. Kissing him. I didn't even know his name, but he'd been a shadow in our lives, lurking in the spaces I thought were ours alone. I paced the room, her words replaying in my head, it wasn't serious. How could it not be serious? How do you let someone into your life like that and pretend it doesn't mean anything? And what about our kids? Did she think of them while she snuck around, betraying the family we'd built together? A sharp knock on the door startled me. For a second, I thought it might be Claire, but Sophie's voice came instead. Dad? Are you okay? I took a deep breath, steadying myself before opening the door. Sophie stood there in her pajamas, her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Her eyes were wide with concern. I'm fine, sweetheart, I lied, crouching to her level. Why aren't you in bed? You and Mom were yelling, she said softly, her gaze searching mine. Are you mad at her? I felt my throat tighten. How do you explain something like this to a 9-year-old? How do you tell her that the world she knows might never be the same? No, I'm not mad, I said finally, forcing a smile. Mom and I were just having a grown-up talk. Nothing for you to worry about. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded anyway. Okay. I kissed her forehead and guided her back toward her room. Get some sleep, kiddo. It's late. Once she was tucked in, I returned to the bedroom, but I couldn't bring myself to lie in the bed I'd shared with Claire. Instead, I sat on the edge, staring at the floor, my thoughts spiraling. Who was this man? What did he give her that I didn't? And more importantly, how far had it gone? Her admission felt incomplete, like she was holding something back. Did she sleep with him? Was this affair still ongoing? My gut twisted at the thought. Pulling out my phone, I scrolled through the contacts until I reached the name of Claire's coworker, Megan. She and Claire had been close for years, often traveling to conferences together. If anyone knew what was going on, it was her. It was risky to call so late, but I needed answers. The phone rang twice before Megan picked up, her voice groggy. Hello. Megan, it's me, Tom, I said, trying to keep my tone even. Sorry to call so late. Tom. She sounded more awake now. Is everything okay? I hesitated, then decided to rip off the band-aid. I need to ask you something about Claire. About her last trip to the city. There was a pause, the kind that spoke volumes. Tom, I don't think I'm the right person to. Please, Megan, I cut in. I just need to know the truth. Was there someone else? Her sigh was heavy, almost regretful. Tom, I love Claire, but you need to talk to her about this. I have, I said through gritted teeth. But she's not telling me everything. Another long pause. Look, I didn't see anything firsthand, Megan said carefully. But I did hear rumors. A guy named Jake. He works in marketing, I think. They hit it off at a conference. That's all I know. Jake. The name landed like a blow. Now he had an identity, and it made him real, too real. Thank you, I said, my voice tight. Tom, Megan said softly. I'm sorry. I hung up without answering, the name Jake bouncing around in my head like a sinister echo. Claire had said it was a mistake. Something she didn't mean to let happen. But how do you mistake months of messages, meetings, and secret notes? My hand trembled as I set the phone down. The truth was unraveling, and with every thread I pulled, the life I thought I knew came closer to falling apart. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The name Jake reverberated in my mind like a drumbeat, drowning out every other thought. Who was he? What did he look like? Where had Claire found him, and why hadn't she been able to let him go? By dawn, I was at my computer. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I debated my next move. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I needed to know. I typed his name into the search bar, adding marketing and the city for good measure. A few hits came up, LinkedIn profiles, social media accounts. And then, there he was. Jake Harper. The profile picture made my stomach churn. He looked like the kind of guy you'd see in a glossy brochure, well-groomed, fit, and polished. His smile was all charm, his suit expensive. He was younger than me, maybe mid-30s, with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. I clicked through his posts, each one a carefully curated snapshot of his life, networking events, dinners at trendy restaurants, and selfies from lavish vacations. He seemed to have it all, and apparently, that included my wife. Every photo made the knot in my chest tighten. I kept scrolling until I hit a post from a few months ago, a photo of him at a conference, standing in front of a sleek presentation screen. He was tagged in a slew of comments, and one in particular stopped me cold. Killer presentation, Jake. Drinks next time you're in town. It was Claire's comment. Her smiling profile picture stared back at me like a slap to the face. I sat back in my chair, my heart hammering. So it hadn't started on the last trip, as she'd claimed. This had been going on for months, maybe longer. I had the proof now, but what could I do with it? Confront her again? She'd just dodge or deflect. No. I needed more. I needed to know exactly what I was up against. My next move was impulsive but calculated. I grabbed my phone and searched for a private investigator. If Claire wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find someone who could. Within an hour, I had a meeting set up for that afternoon. The PI's office was small and unassuming, tucked into a quiet corner of the city. The man who greeted me was in his 50s, with a weathered face and a no-nonsense demeanor. He introduced himself as Dan and gestured for me to sit. "What's the situation?" he asked, pulling out a notepad. I hesitated, my fingers gripping the edge of my chair. Saying it out loud felt like solidifying it into reality. But I forced the words out. "My wife's having an affair," I said flatly. "I need proof." Dan nodded, his expression neutral. "Do you know who with?" "A guy named Jake Harper," I said, sliding a printout of the LinkedIn profile across the desk. "They've met at least once, but I think there's more to it. She travels for work, and, well, I don't think she's telling me everything." Dan studied the profile, jotting down notes. "Any specific dates or places where they've been together?" I told him what I knew, Claire's recent trips, the messages I'd found, and the card. He listened without interrupting, his pen moving steadily. "This kind of case is pretty standard," he said when I finished. "I'll start by tailing her during her next trip. If there's anything to find, I'll find it." I nodded, my throat dry. "How long will it take?" That depends on her, he said simply. But we'll move quickly. Most people slip up sooner or later. As I left his office, a strange mix of guilt and determination settled over me. Hiring someone to spy on Claire felt like crossing a line, but she'd already crossed one herself. If there was more to her story, and I was certain there was, I had to know. The truth was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. The days dragged on after I hired the private investigator, each one heavier than the last. Claire was her usual self, or at least she pretended to be. She smiled, laughed with the kids, kissed me goodnight, but I couldn't unsee the cracks in her facade. Every touch, every glance felt rehearsed, calculated. She had mastered the art of pretending, but now, I was watching her too closely for it to work. Dan, the PI, updated me regularly, though his findings were sparse at first. Claire's routine seemed normal: work, errands, picking up the kids. But then came the breakthrough. One evening, as I was pacing the kitchen with my phone, Dan called. "Got something," he said, his voice steady. "She met with him today." My stomach dropped. "Where?" "A cafe downtown." They were there for about an hour. Looked friendly, intimate. I sank into a chair, gripping the phone tightly. "Did you get pictures?" "Yeah," he said. "I'll send them over." Minutes later, my phone buzzed with an email. My hands trembled as I opened it. There they were, Claire and Jake, sitting across from each other at a small table. She was leaning in, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. He was smiling, his hand resting casually on the table, inches from hers. The photos felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a fling. There was familiarity, comfort in the way they interacted. I scrolled through more pictures, them walking out of the cafe, Jake opening the door for her, their shoulders brushing as they walked to her car. Dan's voice pulled me back. "You want me to keep following?" "Yes," I said immediately. "If there's more, I want to know." That night, I couldn't sleep. The pictures sat on my phone like a weight, dragging me down every time I looked at them. My mind raced with scenarios: how many times had they met? What had they done? Was this love or lust or something in between? The next morning, Claire was in the kitchen, making breakfast for the kids. She moved with practiced ease, flipping pancakes and laughing at Ethan's attempt to crack an egg. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect mom, the perfect wife. But I knew better now. "Big plans today?" I asked casually, leaning against the counter. She glanced at me, her expression carefully neutral. "Just work," she said. "Why?" "Just wondering," I replied, forcing a smile. "You've been busy lately." Her grip on the spatula tightened, but she didn't miss a beat. "You know how it is. Deadlines. Deadlines. Was Jake one of them?" Dan called again 2 days later. "She's planning another trip," he said. Found an itinerary in her email. Leaving Friday morning, back Sunday night. Destination: same city where Harper lives. I closed my eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. "What's the itinerary look like?" He read it out: a hotel reservation, a few work meetings, and plenty of gaps in between. Plenty of time for her to see him. "Follow her," I said, my voice hard. "I need to know everything." On Friday morning, Claire kissed me goodbye as usual, her suitcase by the door. "I'll call tonight," she said, her smile bright but hollow. I nodded, watching her walk out the door and into her car. My stomach churned as she drove away, knowing Dan was already tailing her. The hours crawled by as I waited for updates. By evening, Dan's call came. "She checked into the hotel and met him within the hour," he said. "They're at a restaurant now. Looks like dinner. They're sitting close, talking. Laughing." My grip tightened on the phone. "Anything else?" "I'll stay on them," he assured me. "If they go anywhere else, I'll know." By the end of the night, Dan confirmed what I'd feared most. They left the restaurant together, walked to the hotel, and entered her room. Jake didn't leave. When the call ended, I sat in the dark, the weight of betrayal crushing me. Claire hadn't just lied to me. She had chosen someone else, right in front of me, while pretending everything was fine. I stared at my reflection in the window, the man I saw a stranger now. How had I let it get this far? How had I missed the signs? One thing was clear, I couldn't let this continue. Whatever came next, I had to confront her with everything I knew. No more excuses. No more lies. By the time Claire returned Sunday evening, I had already prepared everything. The photos, the emails, the timeline from the PI, all of it laid out neatly on the dining table. The kids were at my sister's house for the night, and the house was silent except for the ticking clock in the kitchen. When Claire walked through the door, suitcase in hand, her expression softened as she saw me waiting. "Hey," she said, her tone light, like she hadn't spent the weekend with someone else. "Miss me?" "Sit down," I said, my voice firm. Her smile faltered. "What's going on?" "Sit down." She hesitated, but the weight in my tone left no room for argument. She set her suitcase aside and moved to the table, her eyes widening as she took in the evidence before her. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaky. "This," I said, gesturing to the table, "is the truth. The one you've been hiding from me. From us. You've been lying to me, Claire. And now, you're going to tell me everything." Her hands trembled as she picked up the photos of her and Jake at the cafe. Then the hotel records. Then the timeline Dan had meticulously compiled. Each piece of evidence drained the color from her face until she looked pale, almost ghostly. She started, but the words seemed to choke her. "Don't lie," I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "Not again." Tears welled in her eyes as she set the papers down. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "It started out innocent, I swear. I was lonely, and he listened to me. He made me feel alive again." "Alive?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You betrayed me, our family, for a fling that made you feel alive. It wasn't supposed to go this far," she cried, her tears falling freely now. "I didn't think. I didn't know how to stop." "You didn't think because you didn't want to," I snapped. "You made a choice, Claire. Over and over again. And now, it's too late to take it back." She reached out for me, but I stepped back. Her touch felt like poison. "Please, Tom," she begged. "We can fix this. I love you. I love our family." "Do you?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you love him. You chose him. And now, I'm supposed to just forgive you? Pretend this never happened?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "I'll do anything. I'll cut him out of my life. I'll quit my job. Just, please don't give up on us." Her words hung in the air, desperate and hollow. For a moment, I wanted to believe her, to grab onto the shred of hope she offered. But then I thought of the photos, the lies, the nights she'd spent in his arms while I stayed home, trusting her. "No, Claire," I said finally, my voice steady. "You gave up on us the moment you let him into your life. I can't do this anymore." Her sobs grew louder as I turned and walked away. I went upstairs, shutting the door to our bedroom, no, my bedroom, behind me. The sound of her crying echoed through the house, but I didn't go back. I couldn't. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. It was messy, as divorces often are, but I refused to let her spin the narrative. The evidence I'd gathered ensured I got primary custody of the kids. She moved into a small apartment across town, while I stayed in the house, piecing together a new life. The hardest part was telling Sophie and Ethan. I kept it as simple as possible, explaining that Mom and Dad weren't going to live together anymore but that we both loved them very much. They cried, of course, but kids are resilient in ways adults often aren't. As for Claire, I heard she'd moved on quickly, too quickly. Whether she ended up with Jake or someone else didn't matter to me anymore. She was a chapter one had closed. Rebuilding wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Therapy helped. So did the unwavering support of friends and family. Slowly, I found myself again, not the man I'd been before the betrayal, but someone stronger, someone wiser. One evening, as I tucked the kids into bed, Sophie handed me a drawing she'd made. It was our family, me, her, Ethan, and our dog, Max, smiling under a bright sun. I stared at it for a long time, my heart swelling with gratitude. Life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.